Where do Miami's best players rank among the top 100 players in the NBA? We debate ESPN's recent rankings on Tyler Herro, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler, and what the national media gets right and wrong about this trio of Heat stars. A great episode you won't want to miss on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. Joining me as always, David Ramil. However you're tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Got a fun show for you today. A little late reacting to ESPN's top 100 player rankings that came out late last week. We're going to do that today. We're going to get to whether Tyler Herro was disrespected by his ranking. We're going to look ahead to what Heat players could crack the top 100 rankings next season. But let's start at the top with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. So, David, the Heat or the ESPN have Jimmy Butler ranked at number 12, 5 spots up from last year where they had him ranked at 17. And then they got Bam at 16, up from 23 last year. So they have Jimmy and Bam rising after Miami's run to the finals last year. Again, Jimmy at 12, Bam at 16. What are your thoughts on this? High enough? Too low, maybe in Jimmy's case? Where do you stand?
I actually like both of those rankings. I think they're pretty fair, and I think a lot of people probably have more of an argument against Bam's higher ranking. But I don't know how to entertain those conversations anymore after 6 seasons of him being as productive as he's been, of being such a spectacular role player that has the capacity to be a star on offense on occasion. And I know that takes, a big part of the criteria for this is how much does he produce? How much did he produce last year? How much is he expected to produce? Both you and I believe that he'll have a larger role offensively. And I think that's going to help in terms of justifying this ranking. And in terms of what he does defensively, again, the best defender in the NBA, even if he hasn't won the award, it says so. And I think he is pretty fairly ranked. I think, again, a lot of people, and we've talked about this when it comes to Bam as Defensive Player of the Year, they don't watch Bam enough to understand his impact. There's not the blocks, there's not the steals, those sexy statistics that pop out that make it much easier to select, I don't know, Marcus Smart as your Defensive Player of the Year or Jaren Jackson Jr. as your Defensive Player of the Year. Bam does so many other things in terms of getting the offense going, being a hub on both offense and defense, making everybody's job so much easier on both ends of the ball, and also being asked to be the team's second or third leading scorer.
Bam has talked about the stat watching thing a couple of times now. At one time after, I think it was last week's practice, talking with a group of reporters, basically right after the GM survey came out. I think it was the same day or maybe the next afternoon. And talking about how everything is, he thinks it's a lot of stat watching. He thinks that there's a lot of politics involved. And I'm not saying that none of that is true. Obviously, a lot of that is true. And the people who vote on this, I think they watch the Heat some, but they don't watch them as closely as we do, nor do I expect them to. I don't expect everybody in the media to watch the Heat as much as you and I do, who cover the Heat specifically. But I think the stat, it's really easy when you're going through at the end of the year, kind of going through your ballot and just being like, I don't know, Jaren Jackson just has so many blocks. You know what I mean? But then you see Bam have 4 blocks on Sunday night against the Memphis Grizzlies. So maybe he's going to start chasing these stats a little bit and try to win this award. It means something to him, but this is not a DPOY conversation. Here's the thing about Bam Adebayo, and I have not really seen a whole lot of people outraged by Bam. I think smart people, whether or not they think he's a Defensive Player of the Year or not, smart people all agree Bam's a really great player. And we saw that in the NBA Finals, and we saw that in the playoff run. And it's why he's ranked at number 16 and why I haven't seen a whole lot of backlash to it, right? I think the most backlash coming to Bam is from Heat fans who just want him to score 30 points per game. I think that's where most of it comes from. But here's the thing about Bam that I think people are starting to understand about him. He is elite at literally everything that there is to do at the center spot. For his position, he is elite at everything except for scoring. And at scoring, he's merely very good, right? But he is elite at everything else. He is not the rebounding stats, the blocking stats. Miss me with that stuff. The Heat are a top 5 rebounding team, top 3 rebounding team, I think, if I recall from last year, in rebounding percentage when Bam is on the floor. He is the top player in the league in box outs tracked. This is a star player, the 16th best player in the NBA, a top 20 player. By the way, David, you know this. Dating back to this time last year, I was telling people Bam was a top 20 player in the league, and people were rolling their eyes at me. That's what he is. He is as a star player leading the league in box outs. This guy hustles. He does all the little things. As a playmaker, he is only behind probably Nikola Jokic and Domantas Sabonis in terms of just a strict passer at that center spot. He's as good as anybody else in that regard. Defensively, you and I agree, nobody's better at that spot. If you were going to build a defense around any player right now, I don't know how you don't pick Bam. Maybe you would go out and pick Giannis. Maybe you would pick Joel Embiid just for his sheer size. Or maybe you're really into Jaren Jackson Jr. and everything that he brings on the table. But if you like rebounding and hustling and all that other stuff, Bam is better at that than Jaren Jackson Jr. is. And so there is an argument to be made that Bam is not just the 16th best player in the NBA, but I think one of those guys who you would think about starting your team with if you were just trying to build an elite defense. And so I think Bam's reputation is finally catching up with him. And obviously what he was able to do against Jokic, even though nobody could stop him, he did as good a job as anybody did in the playoffs last year, where Jokic was just putting up historic numbers. I think he's garnering a lot of respect for that too.
You're not surprised though? Like when we say it, matter of factly, the 16th best player in the NBA. And again, I know that you've been on this for a while in terms of being a top 20 player, but you look at the players just ahead of them, Donovan Mitchell, Damian Lillard, like Anthony Edwards. Those are top level scorers, and it doesn't really matter.
I'm more interested in who he's in front of. Jamal Murray at 17, Paul George at 18, Jaylen Brown at 19, Karl Anthony Towns at number 20, Tyrese Halliburton at 21. Like, these are the guys that he's ranking in front of. I think Nuggets fans would be like, how could you put Jamal Murray behind Bam Adebayo? And I just say this again. Look at the totality of his game. When you just break down the skill sets, he is elite at everything that he does except for scoring. And at scoring, he is merely just very good. He is a 20-point per game scorer last year. If he was scoring 18 points per game last year, which is basically a difference of 1 basket per game, I don't think he's 16. But because he reached the 20-point threshold, that means something to people, as arbitrary as that might be. I think you have to have him here. So I wasn't surprised to see him at 16. I wasn't surprised that people are starting, even like ESPN, the national media, that is the villain of so many people. I just don't think it's deniable anymore. And I think even Heat fans have to sort of catch up to the idea that people respect Bam Adebayo, because it's happening.
What's his ceiling? We've heard the nickname no ceiling and everything else, but is this as high as he can possibly get in terms of like the NBA's top hierarchy?
I look at Anthony Davis at 10 and I say, is Anthony Davis really 6 spots better than Bam Adebayo? I don't know. I really don't know. I think if Bam were actually in a smaller role where he wasn't asked to score or expected to score as much, maybe people would appreciate even more the other things that he brings to the table. And yeah, I think we're looking at a guy that could probably be not a tier 1, hey, best player on a championship winning team. I don't think I think that's probably too far away from him. Like, he can't be Nikola Jokic. He's not going to take that kind of leap, I don't think. That second tier star, like if we're looking at, I guess you would consider SGA, what Kevin Durant is now, even second tier isn't fair. Like Jason Tatum, like these guys who could be the best player on a championship team, like Joel Embiid, like these could be the best player on a championship team, but we haven't really seen it yet. That even might be too far out of reach, but I think somewhere like in that third star, like, hey, if he's your second best player, you're probably a championship favorite if you have one of those tier 1 stars. I don't know, but let's talk about. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to ask. Like, do you ever see a scenario like down the road where Bam gives up doing the little things that take so much energy and make him such a great player in order to concentrate on just being productive on the offensive end? Because I think that would be like the most beneficial in terms of having him recognized by a larger, less nuanced audience. But he's so good at doing all those little things. I just don't see him being
out of his character. It would right? Be like, he would have to be bipolar and really lean into that second new personality. Like
on Whiteside? What?
Yeah, exactly. No, he would have to be. It would have to be so different. By the way, the things that the Miami Heat love about Bam are those little things. They don't really care about the scoring. That's why we were pining for Damian Lillard so bad. It's like, just take this off of his plate so that he could just do all these things, even at a higher level, right? Like it could. And so, look, I love where Bam is. I don't think it's arguable that the Heat have 2 top 20 players anymore. I want to do a couple things coming up. I want to talk about where Jimmy Butler ranks and why I actually think he's too low, and I think
Okay.
it's sort of getting ridiculous at this point. And then where Miami's best 2 players, Jimmy and Bam, stack up against the other top duos according to ESPN's top 100 ranking. We're going to do that next after this.
Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. You know, sometimes your brain just gets in the way of doing the things that you want to. You can't stop thinking about something. You kind of focus on the things that you might not necessarily need to, and you can't get out of your own way. And maybe you just need to talk to somebody, a licensed professional that might be able to help you get some clarity and peace of mind so you can focus on the things that you need to make your life better. And with that in mind, I'd like to talk to you about BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a very quick questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at no additional charge at any time. Let's say for whatever reason your schedule changes, or maybe you find you'd like to just change the conversation a little bit and you want to seek somebody else. BetterHelp makes it so convenient. No fear of just having to pick out a new therapist or anything like that. It's such a convenient process. So make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Go visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today, and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Everydayers, we're going to react to Zach Lowe's watchability rankings and where he has the Miami Heat ranked tomorrow. We'll also have our preview of the next Miami Heat preseason game and reaction to what goes down, any news that happens out of practice. So make sure you are subscribed. Let's talk about Jimmy Butler being ranked at number 12 here. I'm just going to get right to the point, David. I think it's too low. I think it's too low, and I don't know how that anybody watches what Jimmy Butler did in the playoffs last year. And look, I know that he didn't put up those eye-popping stats in the regular season, but if we want to talk about stats, the advanced metrics basically painted Jimmy Butler as one of the top 6 players in the NBA in last regular season. I understand that ESPN, what they're doing here is projecting forward a little bit, right? And Jimmy Butler is 34 years old. And part of their reasoning why they had him going up from 17 to 12 was based on last year's playoff run and some of the advanced stats, right? So they have him up 5 spots, which is a substantial leap when we get into this kind of territory. But their big question about Jimmy Butler is if age is ever going to catch up with him. And that part I do understand. But I also understand this. There's not 11 players that I would rather have than Jimmy Butler. I don't have a problem with Devin Booker being ranked 11th. I have no problem with that. Devin Booker is a stud, and I'm not going to disrespect Devin Booker in order to prop up Jimmy Butler. But when you have Anthony Davis at number 10, and I like Anthony Davis, and I feel like I'm one of the last people holding out on Anthony Davis as an elite player, and I do think he is an elite player, but I don't think he's better than Jimmy Butler. If it were up to me, I would have had Jimmy Butler at number 10. I probably would have Anthony Davis at number 12, and I think Devin Booker is fine at number 11, right where he is. But I don't see how Jimmy Butler is not a top 10 player at this point.
I think the counter to that is so much of what he does in the playoffs weighs into the consideration in his rank. And, I hate to belabor this point, but he almost didn't get a chance to show how great and how exceptional he could be in a playoff setting had it not been for a miraculous play-in game versus the Chicago Bulls and just a few minutes away from being eliminated altogether from the postseason. And so when you look at what he does during the regular season, which is still very, very good, I can see the argument as to why he wouldn't be considered that. He needs to get to the opportunity to be in the playoffs in order to show that once he's there, then he's the true gamer that you've always said he is, and he'll embrace the moment and have these monstrous level performances. But I think we don't know. And I think a lot of media members, especially nationally, might not think that Miami is a clear favorite to be a playoff contender. And that being the case, then he'll never have that opportunity. He'll never put up those monsters. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, Chicago eliminates Miami. Would you still rank him 12th based on what we saw the year before?
Absolutely not. I mean, you've got Jimmy probably in the 20s, honestly, at that point.
Yeah.
But But I understand what you're saying there, but I'm not saying that he needs to be considered with even LeBron at 9 or SGA at number 8 or Kevin Durant at 7, and certainly not with like the top tier guys like Steph and Luka and all these guys. That's not the argument I'm making. But when I look at Anthony Davis being number 10, you could say the same thing about the Lakers. It's like, hey, if not for this Russell Westbrook trade working out and then making this huge push, like there was times where they weren't supposed to be in the playoffs, right? They had less of a chance of making the playoffs than Miami did, right? And so they pushed their way into the playoffs, and then Anthony Davis basically has one incredible series against the Golden State Warriors, 2 solid series. He was fine against Denver. He was fine against the other team that the Lakers played. But that series, that what he was able to do to the Warriors and Steph Curry and blowing up those pick and rolls and all the things that Steph does off the screen, it's so loud and it stands out in such a way. And look, again, I have no problem with Anthony Davis. I think he's a top 15 player, and I don't have any doubt about that. But if he's at 10, I think I would have just – it's a small gripe, I know, but we're trying to create content here. I would have flipped Jimmy and Anthony Davis. I would have left Devin Booker at 11. I would have had Jimmy at 10. I would have had Anthony Davis at 12. If you want to make you could also make the argument about durability. Anthony Davis played 54 games last year. That was the most he played in a Lakers regular season in 3 years, right? Basically since they won the championship. Jimmy Butler played 10 more games than Anthony Davis did last year. Jimmy Butler is not the most durable guy, but we're talking about the difference of missing 20 games per year and missing 30, 40, 45 games a year in AD's case. So I just would have had Jimmy at 10. That's all I'm saying.
How concerned are you about the age thing? Because I don't think we've talked about it. And I know it's always a factor and you always wonder. I mean, I've been wondering this since before you came back to the show.
I think you have to concern about it. I think you have to be.
I guess, but I've never seen anything like Jimmy. Like Jimmy has gotten better as his career has progressed, and that's rarely the case.
The closest thing is LeBron, isn't it?
Yeah. Like we've never seen anything like that. Again, the closest comp is somebody that most people listening to the show probably don't even remember, and that's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar winning an MVP trophy late in his career,
and he was 7 feet tall.
Retiring. And he was 7 feet tall, right. and he had an unstoppable shot. But to do the work, and it was a different type of offense and everything. But to do the work that Jimmy has and LeBron has, at this point in their respective career, like LeBron's entering year 21 of his NBA career. And he's still a top 10 player.
There's so much that goes. Yes, absolutely. And by the way, I think LeBron is too low at number 9. I don't know. Like in the playoffs, are there 8 players you would rather have than LeBron? No way. It's still LeBron. And by the way, if I'm too late hanging on to LeBron, I'll be late hanging on to maybe the greatest player of all time, being a top, 5 or 6 player in the NBA. But Jimmy, we've seen him in practice. Like that dude is in such great shape. That dude is ripped. He works hard. He has said his greatest skill is working hard, and that's part of the reason why he stays in such great condition, in such great shape. This is why we say we probably have 2 more years of a championship window here in Miami, right? It's because we think Jimmy could be that guy until he's basically 36 years old. After that, he might fall off, but I don't think he falls off in a way that he's going to be forced to retire. Now, maybe he does or whatever. I don't know. But I don't think he'll be forced to. Like, I think this guy's, when he falls off, could still be a top 30 player in the NBA pretty easily because he's so smart. He's so efficient. He doesn't make mistakes. And I think he's one of those guys that you're always going to want. What he needs to do is develop a 3-point shot, but that's neither here nor there. Can we talk about Tyler Herro really quick?
Yeah, why not?
ESPN had him ranked at 79. That is 18 spots less than what he was a year ago. They had him ranked at 61 going into last year. They have him ranked at 79 now. I know this isn't in a vacuum, right? I know this isn't a vacuum. It's not just, is Tyler Herro 18 spots worse than he was last year? Other guys ascend and things like that happen. But I do think something out of his control impacted where it is that he's ranked. We'll tell you what that is next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next event. Gametime is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy shows, theater events near you. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You can get a view from your seat so you know exactly where you'll be and whatever venue you select, and they've got their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's so convenient. Again, you download the app, and when you click on a seat that you like in the price range that you're looking for, you can see exactly where you're going to be sitting. You say, you know what? That's a great value. I love where I'm going to be sitting. That's perfect. Go ahead, press a button or two, and next thing you know, you've got the tickets, and it's so fast, so easy, so convenient. You can't go wrong with Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Welcome back to Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. They have Tyler Herro ranked at number 79. Here's my problem with it. A couple problems with it. He was better than he was 2 years ago.
Year before.
Yeah. His true shooting percentage went up. His points per game went up. Right? Yeah. His points per game basically stayed the same. He averaged more assists. He averaged more steals. He averaged more rebounds. He turned the ball over less. He took more three-pointers. I think he was more important to the offense in general. And I think people forget how many clutch shots he made for the Heat. You could make the argument that Miami's not even in the play-in tournament if not for Tyler Herro. The game winner on New Year's Eve in Utah and all these things. He was, by all accounts, or not by all accounts, but by statistical accounts, maybe the best clutch player in the league last year by statistics. Certainly one of the best three. It was like him, SGA, and a few other people that were up there. But I think that people are so swayed by the fact that he wasn't part of Miami's playoff run. And the talking point around that of the Heat were better off without Tyler Herro and all that stuff. And you and I have debated that and all these things, and we don't need to go into that. But between that and the dragging of his trade value in regards to Damian Lillard and all these things, there were so many things that Tyler Herro, like the context around Tyler Herro, couldn't be worse, right? Yeah. He gets hurt. His team goes on this miraculous run to the finals. He's lumped into trade talks for Damian Lillard to a team that does not need any more scoring guards on that roster. And because of that, his value is dragged through the mud. All of these things happening outside of Tyler Herro's control. He hasn't played a game since April, and he drops 18 spots. And I don't think that has any reflection as to who Tyler Herro is as a player and what it is and how it is that he improved last season as a player. I think that I think there's a lot of noise in this ranking, David.
Side note, significantly higher in these rankings than Anthony Simons, the player that Blazers fans swear up and down is a better version of Tyler Herro than Tyler Herro and makes Tyler's acquisition in Portland superfluous, etc. So just something to put out there. But in terms of Tyler's specific ranking, I agree. I think the conversation has become very toxic. It almost feels like people were waiting for the right excuse to bag on Tyler and what he brings to the table. There was the piece last offseason kind of weighing from Zach Lowe, weighing what Tyler could be, measuring his ceiling and whether or not he'll take that next leap as a player, especially was he rumored to be included in trade talks for Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell, et cetera, and just not knowing exactly the context of how to place Tyler, how to provide the proper value for what Tyler brings to the table. But he went on, had a great season, saw some improvement on the defensive end. I don't think he's as bad as everybody makes it seem. I think people think he is like a doormat defensively. He could be out of position sometimes. Maybe he can't hold his own, but he does give effort. I think that's not questioned. I think he does as good a job as, I think that counts for something, and maybe it doesn't show up on a box score or anything like that, but most defensive plays don't necessarily. That's why you vote for Jaren Jackson Jr. for Defensive Player of the Year. With Tyler, I think he has taken his game to another level last season, and I think there's still room for him to continue growing and for him to improve on the year before that and be knocked as low as he was. Just seems patently ridiculous.
Part of this too is like, look, I know that there's a projecting forward here as part of these ESPN rankings, and so that's why it's actually more interesting to have that kind of conversation. But having Jordan Poole at number 72, and I like Jordan Poole a lot, but having him at 72 and Tyler at 79 doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how you watched Jordan Poole last year and all the mistakes that he made and say that he's going to be a better player this year than Tyler Herro. Now, I understand that Jordan Poole is on the Washington Wizards and he's going to be taking a bunch of shots, and people think that he's going to end up in the top 10 in terms of scoring. But I also have watched Jordan Poole over the last 2 years. He is not going to just magically become a more efficient scorer because he gets to shoot the ball more often. That's not how that works, right? He also commits a ton of mistakes. Every time the Warriors did not need a turnover last year, Jordan Poole committed a turnover last year. Like Tyler Herro is a much better decision maker with the ball in his hands. He's a much more efficient scorer, even if he's not putting up the sheer amount of points or won't put up the sheer amount of points because Jordan Poole is the guy in Washington, where Tyler Herro is behind Jimmy Butler and maybe even Bam Adebayo in the pecking order in Miami. I don't get it. Part of this, too, is a little bit like college football preseason ranking because they will actually take their rankings from the year before where they had Jordan Poole at 55 because he had just helped win the Warriors a championship. They had him at 55, and they're like, well, we can't drop him that much. We'll drop him to 72, where they dropped Tyler Herro, I guess, quote-unquote, only 18 spots. But let's finish the Tyler Herro conversation here. Do you think he was disrespected by this ranking?
Yes, I think disrespect is a strange word because I don't think it's a personal affront. I think it just takes into this consideration everything that we talked about. The fact that, again, the narrative seems to be building that he is just a glorified scorer at best, that he's not even great at that. He's not weird.
It's a weird reputation that he has.
Yeah, again, I feel like there's some almost like not necessarily a personal thing, but I think, look, and I was covering the team while you were in San Francisco during the time of the Orlando bubble. The snarl and the backlash from that and the way that he broke a lot of teams, even as a rookie, hitting those same clutch shots. One of those guys that Eric Spoelstra is always fond of saying, we've got a lot of guys in the locker room that want the ball in those big moments. And Tyler is certainly one of them. And he's been very, very good in that regard. Probably the best clutch player in Miami's roster over that time span. And that just, again, and I know people have criticized me for bringing it up. I think race plays a factor into it. I think it's just a little bit, again, I saw many people saying he's got a punchable face. Like, these are media members, like people who follow and write and talk about basketball, saying they don't like Tyler Herro because he's got a punchable face. And then all of a sudden he's not good enough apparently to acquire Kevin Durant, one of the top 10 players in NBA.
That's the other problem too. It's not just the Damian Lillard stuff. It's the KD, the Donovan Mitchell. It's like he's not good enough to be included in this. And then you see Jordan Poole get part of a deal. Like the fact that Jordan Poole got traded almost helped his value, right? Even though it was traded for a Bradley Beal who wouldn't waive his no trade clause and only Phoenix wanted him. And then Chris Paul, who was basically a salary dump acquisition by Golden State. And I like the Chris Paul acquisition for Golden State, but still. All right. So I don't, you're right. Disrespected is probably too strong and too personal a word, but he got snubbed here. Here's my prediction. Tyler Herro is going to way outplay this projection. He's going to be much better than the 79th player in the NBA. Miami's ceiling sort of depends on how high he can go. And I don't know if that's, to your question, David, I don't know if it's top 50, but he kind of need him to be top 50 unless they make some sort of roster altering move. One other thing I forgot to get to before we ask which Heat player currently can crack the top 100 next year. One other thing I forgot to get to is just sort of looking at Jimmy and Bam. I took sort of the average of the top duos and how ESPN ranked them. The best duo in the NBA, according to ESPN's ranking, is Giannis and Damian Lillard. Not surprising. I would agree with that. Their average ranking is 7.5. They have Giannis at number 1, Dame at like 13 or 14, or I don't remember where he is. But
LeBron AD second.
It was actually Tatum and Jaylen Brown. No, I'm sorry. Devin Booker and Kevin Durant were second with an average ranking of 9. Jokic and Jamal Murray were tied with Anthony Davis and LeBron James at an average ranking of 9.5. Then you've got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the 5th best duo, an average ranking of 12.5. And then you've got Bam and Jimmy Butler, an average ranking of 14. They're the 6th best duo in the NBA. That seems about right to me.
Yeah, I don't have
a quibble with the individual rankings, but in terms of a duo, that seems about right to me. Quickly, David, what player? I think I was a little surprised that Caleb Martin didn't make the top 100, given that he almost won Eastern Conference Finals MVP last year. But then you look at the top 100. I mean, they've got Mitchell Robinson at 100, Jonas Valanciunas at 99, Colin Sexton at 98, Grant Williams at 97, Harrison Barnes at 96. These aren't like world beaters by any stretch, but those are good high-end like rotation players and have been for a very long time, much more a body of work than Caleb Martin does. I was a little surprised, but then I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? The NBA is just so deep with talent. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised that Caleb Martin wasn't in the top 100. And the guy who I compare Caleb Martin to a lot is Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown, despite having been such a big part of Denver's postseason run, and a lot of people saying that the Nuggets can't win the championship this year because they lost Bruce Brown, right? He's not in the top 100, right? So I think that, again, initially surprised, but you look at this a little bit more, maybe not so surprised that Caleb Martin's not in the top 100.
Yeah, I echo that. But it's a lot of depth around the league, a lot of good players, and a lot of good role players that have kind of found their niche as role players, and which there's nothing wrong with that. There, not the expectations to become a star. I don't know that he makes it next year either. I think, again, we've talked about this before. I've been hinting at it a lot. I think Miami's depth is so good that it's going to take away from some of that individual level of productions. You're going to rely more on Tyler as being like a focus offensively, and all your other role players are going to have to step up and kind of find their minutes and find their opportunities when they can get them. And that includes Caleb. Fortunate for him because he's on a contract year, but at the same time, I think he's already shown enough in a couple seasons with Miami where he can go on to provide great value for.
You can be very valuable and not be one of the top 100 players in the NBA. That's what it kind of, again, it sort of reflects how deep the NBA is. And yeah, Bruce Brown's a great example. Kind of forgotten is that Caleb Martin did not have a good regular season statistically last year. He was playing out of position at power forward. That had a big deal, a big part of that. All these things. Yeah. So now that he's mostly playing the wing spot, I think his regular season numbers are going to be better. I am a little surprised that he didn't make the top 100 just because of how loud his playoff performance was in the Eastern Conference Finals. But if he has a better regular season, which we expect him to have, maybe he can crack the top 100 next year. That said, what player on the Heat's roster currently do you think has the best chance to crack the top 100 in next year's ESPN rankings?
I don't think any of them do. I think Caleb has the best chance, but I think that's about it. Other than that, I can maybe make an argument for Josh Richardson. But even that seems much more. Josh, if he emerges
not at 31 years old at this point.
Yeah, that it doesn't seem like anybody else is just going to have that kind of.
Kyle Lowry was, I think, in the 70s last year, and he dropped out, and that makes sense. I would say probably best chance. I don't know if best chance, but if I were going to bet on anybody, I would just say Jaime Jaquez. Like if he's really this NBA ready player, you know what I mean? And he's young and he could kind of burst onto the scene and kind of have that momentum. Like if he's young and good and stuff like that, then yeah, maybe
he'd have to have a monster postseason doing what we've seen from him so far. Just a guy that you bring in, has all his energy, forces turnovers, breaks away for a dunk, hits a big three-point shot, dives to the floor. Like if he does all this when the spotlight is the brightest and national media is watching him in these key moments and
averages double-digit points, and then you could sort of project that forward. Remember, because the rankings project forward, so it's like going into his second year. Can Jaime be one of the top 100 players in the NBA? He would have to kind of create that foundation that you're talking about that people could build on. Jovic, maybe, like if he ends up starting next to Bam by the end of the year, right? Like these rankings aren't based on where they are now. It's based on what they're going to be at the end of the season and what you project forward for the following year. I think Jovic might have a chance, but he would really have to pop this season. And same thing as Jaquez. Like if one of those guys pops, it's probably one of those two guys that have the best chance of cracking the top 100 next year. But this goes to show you, look, we could quibble with the individual rankings, but 3 players in the top 100, that feels right for this Miami Heat group. And you look at their competitors in the East and in the NBA in general, and they have way more than 3 players in the top 100. And I think that we speak about Miami's depth a whole lot. I think this is a good exercise to do because it does sort of give you more of a holistic view of Miami's depth versus the rest of the league. I think the Heat are deep because players 5 through 12 aren't that deep. But I don't think they're deep compared to some of these other teams in the NBA, right? I think Miami's deeper than what they were last year, but I don't think that they're very deep enough to maybe make that huge run. Somebody's got to pop. Somebody's got to get going, for basically 4 weeks in a row or something like that. So we'll see what happens here. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, tune in tomorrow for our preview of Miami's preseason game and against the Brooklyn Nets. We'll be there with a recap of that game for Thursday morning. Plus, we will react to Zach Lowe's ranking of the Miami Heat's watchability. Are people not going to want to watch the Heat this season? We'll talk about that tomorrow. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.